Let's talk about your reef tank's cleanup crew. There's a number of animals that you can add to your tank that are really interesting and have the added benefit of keeping your tank spick and span. In this video, we'll talk about why cleanup crews are important, how you can assemble a cleanup crew to keep your tank clean, and which animals to select. We'll also cover profiles of most of the commonly held species in the reef tank hobby. So what do cleanup crew actually do? Well, they do a lot of things. They reduce the amount of microalgae, which means less scraping of your tank glass. They reduce or even eliminate macroalgae in the tank. They consume fish food and fish waste before it can break down and join the nitrogen cycle. Cleanup crew also stir the substrate. Cleanup crew also eat some pests that will occur in the tank. And finally, they add the biodiversity to the tank that make it look like a functioning reef system. They're interesting, and they look nice. You should add your cleanup crew in stages. The first cleanup crew can go in as soon as you see algae in the tank. Add more cleanup crew as you see more algae and you add more fish. Over time, your cleanup crew's population will self-regulate based upon available food, available habitats, and the lifespan of the cleanup crew members. Here's a sample cleanup crew for a 32-gallon mixed reef tank. You'd have 20 medium herbivorous snails, 8 carnivores, 20 to 40 small snails, about 10 hermits, as well as an urchin and a mithrax crab. We'll go over each of these species later in the video, but the important thing is to remember you're assembling a team of specialists. Each of your cleanup crew members is good at different things. You want to assemble a team that can best clean up your tank. You can buy cleanup crew at any local fish store. There are online retailers for them as well. My favorite is Reef Cleaners. I have no relationship with them, but I'll add their link in the description. Let's talk about Centerpiece cleanup crew members. These types of animals are a little bit larger and are usually kept at about 1 per 30 gallons of tank size. You see here a blue tuxedo urchin. Urchins are well regarded for their voracious appetite and their cutting power. Their mouths are able to actually scrape along like a rock and pull up the last bits of any micro and macroalgae. They're particularly effective at containing macroalgae and are also well known for being voracious eaters of hair algae. Urchins don't tend to have too many drawbacks. They do eat coralline algae, which a lot of people want to keep growing in their tanks. Be sure your rock work is well glued together, as they like to move things around, and ignore the small snails and shells that they carry on their back. Next, we get into the mithrax crabs. This particular example is a ruby mithrax crab. These are a little bit harder to find, but seem a little bit tamer than their cousins, the emerald crabs. Emerald crabs are omnivores. They eat meat as well as algae. This makes them excellent cleanup crew members for when a catastrophe happens in the tank, like a snail dies or a fish dies. They're also very important for being able to control select algae, in particular Valonia, which is bubble algae. The emerald crab is a bit more common in the hobby. As you can see, this one likes being a little more out in the open and even interactive with fish and humans. Emeralds are very beautiful, and they're most useful for sifting through particularly coarse substrate. They can pick around a lot of corals and a lot of crevices. Really almost a must-have. Next up, we have the core of our cleanup crew, the herbivorous snail. Herbivores prefer to eat plant material, although some species will eat meat that they come across. Having enough herbivores in your cleanup crew will minimize the amount of microalgae in the tank, which often manifests as a film on the glass. They also help control more complex algae like hair algae or larger macroalgae species. Algae will never be completely eliminated from your tank, But these cleanup crew members are working 24 hours a day to help knock it back. And combined with your work by manually removing algae, you can keep it well under control. You've seen a number of shots of margarita snails, which are probably my favorite mid-sized snail. Cerith snails are a really great all-around cleanup crew member. This is a Cortez cerith. Different snails will excel at different things. Some will prefer one type of algae over another. Others will prefer the glass versus your rockwork, and while still others will dwell in the sand. Be sure to add a variety of species to your cleanup crew. This allows each of them to exercise their strengths and keep your tank as clean as possible. Nerites, ceriths, astrea, and trocus snails all cost less than $3 each, and although their numbers dwindle over time, this is relatively affordable to keep up your population. If you're lucky, you might even get some of your snails breeding in the tank, like this very tiny trocus snail that I encountered while filming. Trocus snails are often confused with Astrea snails. Astrea snails are really great too, kind of a generalist. Trocus, though, are really far better at consuming problematic algae and really almost keeping the side walls of your tank clean. Your herbivorous snails don't have to be boring. Here's an example of a ninja star Astrea snail. These guys look really cool. They have one or two sets of spikes around the outside, and really function exactly the same like an Astrea snail, spending a lot of time on rocks, a little bit on the glass. Here we see my favorite herbivore, the money cowrie. These are a little bit harder to find and a little bit more expensive. This was about $5 or so to buy, but they're really great herbivores. They consume hair algae in large quantities, and they'll stay in one spot until it's completely clean. They actually clean themselves with this mantle that comes over the top and keeps the shell nice and shiny. Stomatella snails look like slugs, and they often come in as hitchhikers. People get a little freaked out when they see them. They look like they have a thumbnail on their back. But in reality, these are really great additions to your cleanup crew, and you should keep them if you find them. The last herbivore we'll talk about are conchs. Conch are large snails that live only on the substrate. They are omnivores, but will keep the substrate completely clean of diatoms, cyanobacteria, hair algae, and other microalgae. This example is a strawberry conch. It's about 2.5 inches long. Conch are a bit more evolved than other snails and have a reactive eye stalk as well as this elephant-like trunk that they use to feed. Keeping about one of these per 30 gallons is about right. Next, we're going to talk about small snails. These are snails you probably can't buy at most of your local fish stores, but look for them online or from other local reefers. The two that I have in my tank are dwarf ceriths and colonista snails. Here, crawling on the back of a Astrea snail, is a colonista snail. As you can see, they're only maybe 2 millimeters across. This helps them get into the tiny crevices all over the tank, clear up that detritus, the macroalgae, and the colonies of larger, more complex algae that are coming together. A medium-sized snail, like a margarita, is just not going to be able to get into those spots. And that's why I find that these small snails are just an essential part of my cleanup crew. But look, we got two of them now. Some people have reported problems of these getting into pumps and overflows and clogging them up. I have not experienced that yet. Um, Here's a few more examples of how tiny they are. I can see why that could be a problem, but as long as you service your equipment on a regular basis, I don't think you'll wind up with a colony of these living in a power head. Colonista snails do reproduce in the tank, and here's one of their egg pouches. So it looks like I'll have some new cleanup crew soon. Another small snail that gets a lot of attention is the dwarf cerith. These are about 3 to 5 millimeters long, and you can see they do reproduce in the tank, but it's not as common as the colonista snail. These guys do a great job on the glass as well as in the crevices of rock. Other reef hobbyists are probably the best place to get these small snails, but I have seen them for sale at Top Shelf Aquatics, particularly the colonista snails, as well as reef cleaners, which will be by far the cheapest way to get any cleanup crew. Next, we'll talk about carnivorous snails. These snails eat exclusively meat, but in our case, it usually means leftover fish food and a little bit of fish detritus. Here you see a bumblebee snail. Bumblebee snails are small, carnivorous snails, really about a third of an inch across. They serve a similar purpose to Necarious snails in that they consume leftover fish food and fish waste. However, they also help control pests like vermeted snails and sometimes even bristleworms. Next up, I caught this Marginella snail out looking for food. These are really tiny but really attractive snails and apparently very long lived. This one I've had for at least 2 years. Here is a Tongan Necarious snail burrowing into the substrate. Necarious snails come in a few different sizes, with Necarious vibex being really tiny at about a third of an inch across. These Tongan varieties, though, can get about an inch long, maybe a bit longer. I've also seen some perhaps mislabeled, really large snails that are labeled as Necarious, but without a real well-known origin. So bumblebee, Necarious, and Marginella snails are really the three main ones you'll run into in the carnivorous category. They are a really important cleanup crew member to have because they stir the substrate and pick up all this leftover fish food. I'd recommend one carnivorous snail for every 3 or 4 herbivorous snails. You might also consider adding these right about the same time that you step up your fish stock. So add a couple right when you get your first fish, and a couple as you add more fish to the tank and thus feed more. And here's that Tongan Necarious during the day after his sand nap. Now we'll move on to my favorite cleanup crew members, the hermit crabs. Hermit crabs are an essential piece of any cleanup crew. Hermit crabs are really entertaining. This redleg has decided to make its home this Anacropora coral, and it sits in it like a hammock most of the day. This electric blue leg is much larger than the others, probably about an inch and a half across. It's in there for larger pieces of food. Here's a gray leg hermit, another small one, but it's bumbling across the bottom of the tank in a Cortez cerith snail that it has appropriated. Hermit crabs will change their shells often, and you can give them some options, like this dove snail shell that I put in, and this gray leg decided to move in. Hermit crabs are omnivores, so they eat some algae as well as meaty foods. They're particularly useful when you're dealing with hair algae because they can pick at it at the bottom and actually disrupt the root structure to the extent that hair algae has that. You can see this hermit really picking at the individual crevices of the live rock. Smaller hermits are usually $1 or $2, quite inexpensive. You can also get some bigger pieces, more entertaining ones like this Halloween hermit crab. It occupies shells that used to be used by conchs, and it is about 2 inches across, really similar in size to the electric blue leg. Hermits really do vary in their aggressiveness. Some scarlet hermits are well known, like this one, to be a little bit more aggressive, although they typically won't go after any living thing. Now we'll talk about a few tank inhabitants that can help keep things clean but aren't expressly cleanup crew members. They might also help with some pests. This is Radar, my blood red cleaner shrimp. They don't really clean the tank as much. They'll actually probably take food away from corals and fish. But they do keep things tidy, and they also actually do a little bit of a cleaning service for the fish and will scrape their scales off for parasites. Sexy shrimp or bongo shrimp also scavenge, in particular near anemones. And near anemones, a lot of other cleanup crew won't go because they can be preyed upon. But sexy shrimp are a symbiont with anemones. Coral banded shrimp are another option for scavenging in the tank. You'll probably want to feed these guys directly so they aren't really too much of a cleaner, but they do help control pests, in particular flatworms and bristleworms. Here's a nice view of a trochus snail and some nearite snails on the wall of the tank. I think there can be a place for filter feeders as well. This is a cocoa worm. Feather dusters are in the same category here. You can also consider clams or even non-photosynthetic gorgonians as something of a filter feeder. You may at least want to start out feeding these with phytoplankton, but it's at least something to consider. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, please consider a like and subscribe to help support the channel. In the comments below, let us know about your cleanup crew and what species have been most helpful in your reef tank. Thanks again for watching, and happy reefing.